All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. We're just getting into that discussion, and it's all about the Building Bridges initiative. It's officially being launched to the public today at the Bomas of Kenya. We have another panel on the other side with Sam Gituku and Francis Gashuri. We'll be crossing over to them in just a bit. Both the newspapers have the pull-out regarding the Building Bridges initiative report. But let me introduce my guests real quick, beginning from my immediate left. Mr. Sam Kamau, thank you so much for making time. University lecturer and also political commentator, asante sana. Followed by Mule Musau, National Coordinator, ELOG, Election Observation Group, asante for making time. And David Osian, Communication Strategist, Governance and Policy Expert. Thank you. Asante for coming to this morning. Yeah. So, Osian, I'll start with you. Is this a silver bullet Kenya was waiting for?
We will read. We will read. I think what's presented here is a winner-take-all kind of thing. I mean, there's something good for everyone. Those who are opposed to BBI find themselves in a very hard corner because there's nothing to oppose. It demonstrates that I bet there was goodwill. This was done for the nation. But bottom line, Kenyans will still have to re-engineer themselves. You know, for every good action such as BBI, we must have a corresponding good behavior from the Kenyan, from the political class, from all the leaders. So I think so far, what I have read, so far, so good. Let's wait and see and read and digest. We could come tomorrow morning after reading all night, because it's now going to be launched at Bomas of Kenya. Yeah. And so that we may be reading a summary. We want to read the whole stuff, and then, yeah. Okay. But the points that are raised and the few things that are addressed, to me, look like we have gotten to a point of convergence. Okay. And we'll get into the details one by one, but let me just get a feel of what you think, Mule, just generally outlook. What do you think from what you know so far?
Well, like David says, personally, I think a quick skim through the summary, it looks like a very good report. It looks like something which can be able to heal some of the issues that we have in the country. I think, again, my view is that what we need to correct in this country has never been, Kenya has been we have been very good when it comes to writing reports or coming up with positions, papers, in terms of whatever changes we want to have. That includes even the new constitution, the constitution we got in 2010. I mean, we were able to go around the country and get largely what Kenyans aspired to be within their governance system. It is the implementation that's where the rubber meets the road. It's about how do we implement this. If it is going to be accepted, the implementation, the bad manners that Osiani is alluding to, is what we need to cure. And if you can be able to find a cure, therefore, for that, then such reports may well benefit the country. Okay. Sam?
Yeah, I think for me, I want to concur with my colleagues that it's a good report, at least from what we have interacted with. The other thing I appreciate is that it's an attempt to diagnose the problems that have been facing us as a country and tracing back, across history. The other thing that I really appreciate is that it seems to offer what you'd call a new vision for a united Kenya, underlying the issue of cohesion and bringing the country together. And most important for me, seems to offer a pathway to what you'd call a better future for all Kenyans, if the proposals that are largely good and seen as good, that actually very few people would have a reason for opposing these, seems to offer a vision or a pathway to a better future. I think the next step would be, how do we realize things? Because these are proposals that are based on our understanding, or at least an attempt to diagnose what are the issues that have been affecting us as a country. These are the general proposals we have made. It's supposed to open a door for a national conversation so that we agree to get us to this prosperous, united Kenya. This is the pathway we need to follow. These are the specific issues that we need to do. These are the specific changes that we need to make to help us realize the dream. So these are good proposals, but there is now the journey of taking us to this vision. It has given us a vision of what we can come together as Kenyans and say we want to move towards this. Yeah.
Osian, what is so different about having a prime minister who's appointed by the president and is an elected member of parliament, isn't just, like Aaron Cheriot said, isn't just that Duale's role, which is the leader of majority, now called the prime minister.
Well, Cheriot is disappointed because they waited for something to oppose and they don't have it. But I think what that offers is it leaves it to the conscience of the president now to ensure that the country is balanced, that the country feels as if they're included. You see, if you had decided that a prime minister is elected on the floor of the house, and yet you have seen that for 10,000 shillings, Jaswant Rai is able to literally alter a whole report on the sugar sector, you can imagine the highest bidder would buy everyone in that parliament and become prime minister. But the moment you leave it to the president, then the president ought to be aware, based on the propositions in the report, that one, there has to be an ethnic balance. We are a very ethnocentric country. I have said this time and over again. Kenyan man thinks of himself first as who speaks my mother tongue. They identify with that. It's not a Kenyan problem only. Globally, people look for the things that make them identify with each other. Sometimes it's language, sometimes it's race. And so they discriminate against others based on their identities. In Kenya, the ethnic identity, which is a good thing, has become our worst trouble. So the president, if he's elected from a majority ethnic community, is given the power to appoint a prime minister who will look like there has been consideration of the ethnic problem in this country. So if you then come from Mount Kenya, you may have to tuck yourself in the back of Northeastern to find a prime minister within your party so that you have a national face. If you are the president is from Luo Nyanza, he will have to find a brother from Tharaka, wherever it is, so that people can appreciate that the face of the country is given a chance as we grow out of our negatively ethnic problem.
Yeah. Muli, is there a possibility of having that face that David is talking about? Because this will still, the prime minister will still come from the majority party in the house, appointed by the president.
I said we need to cure bad manners because there's no guarantee. Oceani's thinking is very correct that ideally the president ought to try to look out and balance. Yeah. But it may not happen. That's why we're talking about the implementation part. It may not happen. I think what I like about the issue of the prime minister is that Duale is a majority leader, not the prime minister. The prime minister runs government.
Literally. And
it is a good idea to divorce the president from running government. Because as things stand, it is the president who is running the government. So we want the president to be divorced, to become much more of a national figure than just somebody who is running the government and his political party. So it's a good idea. In any case, most of the issues that need to be dealt with, especially within a parliamentary level where you want questions, and I think they're introducing the issue of the prime minister's time. So you want an interrogation of what the government is doing within parliament. So the idea for me is a beautiful idea. If we try as much as possible, we use the opportunity to be able to balance the country, that would also be an extended goodwill from the president to the people. Yeah. But if they use it again to skew things, if the president decides, for instance, that you know what, it is our prerogative. Although I think there's some level of interrogation by the parliament also in terms of the vetting process, but they could as well decide to choose an unpopular person or that.
Because as long as he still has the majority, he still has the power to decide.
Actually, one of the issues before somebody comes in, one of the issues I was faced with one time is when a streetwise guy was asking me why we think that parliament can be able to choose the leader of government for the people when we know they conspire in toilets.
For me, it's an important proposal. Yeah. Remember, the desire to make sure that the person who is elected president gains support from across the country made us introduce the 50% plus one. Yeah. And also we came up with that you need at least 25% in more than half of the countries. That seems to have worked. But what we have seen from 2013 and 2017 is that dominant or major communities can come together and build a strong coalition that helps them do this. But what this new requirement, of course, does, partly building from what Osiani said, is that it might also spur the development and growth of what you'd call strong parties. So that if you are building a broad-based coalition that seeks to get support from across the country, then in terms of what will be attractive is what are the positions that are available, because for some reason, and Osiani has explained, as Kenyans we tend to see ourselves and our interests through the leaders who represent us. So in a situation whereby you look at the structure of the executive, there is the president, the deputy president, but when we build strong parties and coalitions, then you can say the prime minister comes from a different area. These are some of the progressive gains that we have seen in terms of trying to ensure that there is better representation within the structures government, because you have to remember, and I've been saying as we talk about the handshake and the BBI report, we have to remember what necessitated this. Where did we come from? It's because we had a contested election, and there was a feeling among a significant section of Kenyans who were feeling excluded from the process. So making recommendations that would help everybody, at least Kenyans, especially those who have been feeling marginalized, see themselves and an opportunity to participate within the structures of governance, then this is a proposal that seeks to point us in that direction.
Okay. Yeah. I want us to go through them one by one, but now let's stick with the Prime Minister's slot for a bit, David. And what does this say about impartiality and control, really? Because the president still appoints the Prime Minister anyway. So accountability and impartiality, where will that lie? It's still one and the same extension of power anyway.
No, I want us to understand that, Kenya has generally been modeled on a parliamentary system basis until 2010, when we went the whole presidential system kind of way. In the previous government, we had a prime minister lookalike. Before Raila became prime minister, there was a prime minister called George Saitoti and the other vice presidents. They were leaders of government business in the house, acting from the house, answering questions in the house. They were only called vice presidents, but they were prime ministerial. The appointed prime minister in this new proposal is actually going to be above the vice president, the deputy president. That's what people don't seem to understand. That his job as the leader of government business is going to be the equivalent of what used to happen with George Saitoti and all those other vice presidents before we changed the constitution. To be leader of government business, to steer government business, is such a huge role. If you found a president who doesn't care about his deputy because of bad manners or whatever reason it is, and relegates him to the corner, I guarantee you that the prime minister will be such a massive role. But in terms of accountability, I return it back to what I said, our ethos, which are attempted, the BBI has attempted to address, but they cannot force it on us. Remember Barack Obama being elected said, I may propose good things that will lead this country forward, but I will not come to your sitting room, switch off the television and make your children study or have good behavior. There are things that we have to do on our own, from the floors of our homes, to teach our children what values there are, do them in school. I have seen the proposal to try and entrench ethics and values education right from primary school, which I think is a brilliant proposal by the BBI. But there are also frameworks that are proposed for accountability that will not be hinged upon the Prime Minister. I have seen from the little I have read that there are different models we have of trying to deal with corruption. People have to declare if you own more than 50 million shillings worth of asset, you are going to be put to task to explain where it is. Now, we then have to ensure that there is a way in which this cuts across. It's not done for some and others are left out. Absolute impartiality. There are institutions mandated with fostering impartiality. But if they don't have the good behavior that I started by stating, then it will count for naught. So when all this is said and done, it is left for this software, for us to try and take it in. Yeah, it will not compel us to behave right.
So there's no accountability will depend on the person.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. not on the person.
That's trying to simplify. I think one of the things you have to appreciate is that within the 2010 Constitution, which we are still implementing, seeks to strengthen what you would call accountability mechanisms. Exactly. And looking at the proposals within BBI, even at the county level, we are still trying to look for mechanisms to strengthen accountability in terms of if we want to send more funds to the counties, in terms of management of, funds even at the national level. These things have to be there. The only issue is, yes, of course, it's emphasizing about the president appointing the Prime Minister. But Parliament has a role in that. And it's not that, and I think this was made very clear, that this does not replace existing structures and mechanisms and legal structures for accountability and these things. It's just that these are proposals that are helping to enhance, to strengthen, because we can tell what has not been working in the past. So these are good proposals at this stage. And I think one of the things that we need to explain to Kenyans, these proposals is not what will automatically become law and become the practice. It is opening a door for us. It's a national conversation around these things, that these are good proposals. We have identified, you've gone to the doctor, you are unwell, you have all these symptoms, and the doctor says, from these, I can tell these are the issues. There's a range of treatment, the things you need to consider. It's what we eventually agree. But these are good proposals, at least in helping us address some very basic issues. Those feelings of exclusion and those things that have been there. But in terms of making it work, because there are still some problematic issues with these proposals, by the way, you think about it in terms of the actual implementation. But it's a good starting point. We see how can we strengthen mechanisms of accountability. If it is around corruption, we have seen certain very good proposals that will help us with that. If it is sending more funds to the counties, also proposing that we also need to find a way of making sure the funds are utilized in the right way. If it is holding the system of checks and balances, we should work, because one of the issues we are seeing right now is where the so-called opposition, which is not very clear at the moment, lacks the ability to hold, the government or the executive to account. And perhaps the reintroduction of the position of the Prime Minister, but also the leader of the official opposition, is part of that process in helping us now strengthen these mechanisms, and in the long run, we can have better accountability.
All right. And on that note, let me take a quick break here. We'd like to hear your thoughts as well on the Building Bridges Initiative report, the preliminarily. What do you think? Is it a good idea? Is it not a good idea? What are the issues you have? What are the concerns you may have? It's being launched officially at the Bomas of Kenya, and Sam Gituku and Francis Gashuri are there. We'll be crossing over to him again at the Bomas of Kenya. That's where the launch is happening right now. The 4,700 delegates are expected, 100 from each county. They're just streaming into the Bomas of Kenya now. We'll cross over to Sam Gituku and Francis Gashuri. For that, we are going through the proposal here with my panelists in studio, one at a time. We're still at the Prime Minister's position. Then we'll get to the mixed cabinet position. We'd like to hear from you as well. 22422 is the SMS line. At Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya, #Daybreak. Tell us what you think about the preliminary report that you've seen. It's being officially launched today at the Bomas of Kenya, but there's a lot of it on the newspapers. What do you think so far from what the leaders have said yesterday and on Twitter and social media? What are your thoughts generally? That's what we'd like to know right after this break. All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. We'd like to hear your views on the BBI report, which is officially being launched to the public at the Bomas of Kenya today. 4,700 delegates expected there. They've already started trickling in. Your views will be very important to tell us what you think about this report at Citizen TV Kenya. Trevor Mbija. #Daybreak 22422 is the SMS line in case you need to send in more characters than 140. I see Gunjiri Wambugu here taking a swipe at the leaders, saying ultimately BBI wins. It is hilarious watching people who were fighting BBI yesterday explaining how it's their views driving BBI today. But we will let them have their fun. It's not easy to swallow humble pie. That's from Gunjiri Wambugu there. We're still on the issue of the Prime Minister, David, and also Sam brought it up earlier on that some of these things, implementation is going to be where the challenge is. So here's an interesting setup whereby the President does not have the majority of the party members in Parliament. Does he then select a Prime Minister from the opposition?
He is compelled to pick a friendly Prime Minister for the good of the country. And as we were saying, Sam intimated while we were offset that, we want to try and get to a point where cohesion is real. So those moments, those hard moments when the president will have to choose from an overwhelming majority in parliament that is diametrically opposed to his policies, you know, or the platforms on which they ran for presidency, will be the rare moments that Kenya has long awaited. In fact, I hope it becomes a reality that, one, the BBI passes in whichever way we decide to drive it, whether through a referendum or whatever case it is, and after that, then, that we get to have a point where the president is elected but doesn't have majority of members of parliament, you know, and is compelled to then pick from that majority. That is how you build cohesion. Cohesion building and nation building it's a painful process. Sometimes you have to go against the grain. It's hard, but we have to be deliberate about it. So that's the proposal, and I still think I support it. But even if, because people tend to abuse some of these things, so the president will come, majority leader, and he will pick the most cantankerous of the parliamentarians to become a prime minister, that will not demonstrate the desire to move Kenya forward. Remember, Trevor, that the reason we even went to the extent of building BBI is that we had differed on the political, you know, management or electoral management. Now, politics is about distribution of resources. The hugest and the key most resource is power. First is power, because power is the avenue through which all these other resources are found. So there must be a just manner, a fair way of getting resource number one. Now, power is at the whims of the leadership, president, prime minister, everything. If it is not demonstrated that the people in office are willing to execute power for the good of the country, then we have lost it. So the president has to pick at any time someone, even if it is from his majority party, assuming he has everything going for him, someone who espouses in Kenyans the longing for better, not for worse. If you come up with the Duales of this world to be prime minister, we will have lost it from day one.
Would this be a recipe for chaos then? Because how do you select someone to run the government functions who was fundamentally opposed to your policies to begin with?
I think there are technical challenges in this, and there are a number of scenarios. One scenario is, you see, we're still talking about, you're talking about if the opposition get majority seats in terms of the party. And remember, there's a seat for the opposition in parliament also. So that's a scenario, again, which brings some technical problems to the running of government. I think this opens, for me, I think it will open the pathway towards coalition building. Because if you want to govern as a president, you also really don't want to have an opposition party being the one in charge of running affairs of government. They are totally opposed. I mean, you ran on a manifesto which says you want to do A, B, C, D, and then you get an opposition which wants to do D, E, F. There's no way that is going to work. So I think for me, this should encourage, one, the person running for the presidency to have a very strong coalition that can be able to win majority seats. And I think, like you've seen in other jurisdictions where we have had such kind of setups, where we have an opposition, sometimes even you have to dissolve or come up with new mechanics of how you can be able to rearrange parliament to be able to get another. See, like in German, when people have, when you realize that you don't have the majority, you must coerce maybe another group, another party to come into your coalition. So that you can be able to form a majority in parliament. Otherwise, you're not going to choose really, to deliberately choose your opposition leader to become your head of government when you're the president. So in my view, I think it's a question, it's actually building on what David is saying in terms of cohesion, because you see now, if you have to ask the Greens, if you have so-called Greens in Parliament, to join your camp so that you can be able to form a majority in Parliament, then you'll be reaching out to another outfit, which you had not worked with before. So it's the mechanics of coalition building must be, must be well detailed, very clear in terms of how you can be able to go about it. The devil is always in detail of all these reports. That's why you see we are all skimming through in terms of the summary, but we want to see in terms of the details. How then do we build? How then do we approach the issue of majority? Is a majority party in Parliament a coalition? Or is it just a political party? I think a coalition is what is it to work under these circumstances, because that reality is a reality that Kenya has faced before, and we do not want to get ourselves in a situation like that.
Okay, Sam, you're the one who started this conversation, and it gets even more complex, because even then the president still needs a 2/3 majority for the PM, and after elections he still has to make sure that the person he selects for PM, then everybody agrees, including part of the other guys who may not necessarily approve of him.
Let me make two important observations, moving the conversation forward, but building on what they have said. One of the things that is obvious is we have not gone for a parliamentary system purely, and again we are trying to move slightly away from the pure presidential system, and what we are recommending is some kind of a hybrid, and this is part of why I'm saying we have to continue discussing and see how does this exactly work. I don't see the problem, by the way, in terms of if it was a pure parliamentary system, if there was to be that scenario where the Prime Minister comes from, from what we are calling opposition party, but let's just call it a majority party. It actually says that if there is nobody with that majority, then it's the one who seems to have broad support, and that means goes into coalition building. But the other thing is to remind ourselves, we've been here before in terms of the Grand Coalition government, where we had Kibaki as the president and Raila as the prime minister, but he had, his party at least that time had a majority. And for some reason, a lot of things were achieved in this country under that kind of an arrangement. So it's not necessarily something bad. What we have to contend with at this point is how to make this work, especially now that we have still retained the executive, power in the presidency. But and that is why some people are saying now the Prime Minister becomes, they say, glorified, minister. It is a sense of trying how we will make this exactly work. But when I look at it, these proposals, like we said, they are good. There is certain language, of course, that might change, disappear, whether you're talking about majority, minority, opposition, because again, it says for the opposition leader, it is anybody now who leads a party that is not participating in government. That means outside the Prime Minister. So these are scenarios that will have to make it work. But what is good for me is that when you talk about cohesion, and remember the foundation of these, even as we explore the structure of the executive, the foundation of this is around what we are calling national ethos. Who we are as a country, what vision do we have, how do we see ourselves as Kenyans, and do we come together so that in the context of elections that tend to divide us, we do not give up on Kenya and say that then Kenya does not matter. It is believing that these leaders, whoever they are, the president, the prime minister, the deputy president, and the other leaders, are working towards a common vision for Kenya, which is defined, and it is their manifestos that interpret this. It's not that the fact that somebody is from the opposition then has a very different pathway to what should define us as Kenyans or where we want to take the country forward. But like I said, what I expect, in fact, is an important question. Now that these proposals have been made, what next? It is some kind of consensus building around these proposals, and how best do we arrive at this and make these proposals work?
Okay. Let me just add a very quick point on a technicality. They are proposing to have the leader of opposition, the runner-up to the president, being the leader of the opposition, become the next official member of parliament. So I'll find it very difficult for the president. Therefore, if that party becomes the majority in parliament, I mean, it's going to be very difficult for the president to be able to choose that person from that. You have the leader of the opposition.
Then you have the Prime Minister
automatically becoming, you have a Prime Minister. I mean, it's the opposition which will be running government. So I think we still have to go through these issues in more detail, but I think coalition building becomes a major area of focus moving forward if this arrangement is going to hold sway.
It's instructive to note, Trevor, that you will need 2/3 of parliament to be able to appoint the prime minister. So the president will appoint and send to the parliament where 2/3 must vote. Now, at any given time, it is going to be very hard to get 2/3, especially if you've come from a vicious election, which is always the case, where, you know, the elections are crazy out here. Immediately after that, to be able to achieve 2/3 will compel the president then to negotiate with this opposition leader. That is how we start to get peace, tranquility, and cohesion. Because you've come from the back of an election. Now, look at the scenario where NASA and Jubilee came from the election, and as we were running across the city. It will force the president to come down to the level of the number 2. And consult him and say, I have this prime minister, or who do you want to propose in my party that you think will carry, you know, your aspirations in a way that you think is more dignified, or in a manner that you trust better. It will compel him. It is because it is impossible to achieve 2/3 of 290 members of parliament or of 349. So those are the structures that have been, you know, they hide under this whole prime minister thing. The pathway to its achievement, to achieving it, the detail therein is where our cure quite lies.
And what about the mixed cabinet here, where the president appoints a cabinet ministers after consultation with the prime minister? First of all, what do you think about the mixed cabinet? Some of them MPs, others technocrats. And then you have to consult the prime minister, who essentially you're the one who's really appointed.
Of course, so it's just the president shall appoint.
Exactly. It's just the president appointing people.
What I think is you need that blend of both worlds is good. We have seen that we can be disappointed by politicians and by technocrats.
Absolutely. In equal measure.
In equal measure. We gave them a chance. We said we didn't want parliamentarians. But you need to know that there is the place of institutional memory. Some of these people who have served in the political field know how government runs, as opposed to getting someone from the corporate sector who has been in Djibouti running Save the Children for all his life, and you bring him to Kenya, or who has been running the Swiss bank all this while, and then you bring him and throw him in the middle of all this madness, and he has to deal with politics in government. So you need a blend of both worlds. I think it is, people can execute. You just need to get the right characters. If you get characters who have demonstrated ineptitude through and through, and you still think that they are going to do anything good for the country, you lose it.
Mule, what do you think about the interlocking functions of these cabinet ministers? One of them now, some of the technocrats always say dealing with politicians is hard because they're more political and people are more towards objectives and principles. How will they gel between the two?
Personally, I have a problem with this proposal because you know, what Osiadi is saying, we can cure it by getting other old members of parliament or people who are not in power anymore and appoint them. Because if it's a political issue, from a purist point of view, you do not, for purposes of checks and balances, you do not want legislators and the executive to be one and the same thing. You want to check the other. So, and we moved away from that point because that was a major argumentation. The other argumentation was that you are having members of parliament who are supposed to be serving a particular constituency who are much more involved in running affairs of government. So representation was also being lost. So I have a problem with this because I think we can be able to solve it in a different way. We can be able to get politicians. There are politicians who are not in power, who can be able to be appointed in terms of cabinet ministers. But the mixing, while the intended purpose and the objective is very clear, as David has said, that it's good to get somebody with some political acumen to be in positions of cabinet, the cabinet minister, to run, to be able to be a functionary of government at the minister level. But you're going to deny certain constituencies the right to optimum representation because they're not getting everything. The person is being running all over the world, maybe chasing this development project or the other, and then the other thing is that you want them to be the ones checking the government in terms of any excesses they may be having. So I find this a little problematic, but I said, since it's a proposal, perhaps as we move forward, there'll be, some things will become much more clearer in terms of how then do we intend. It's good that they have retained, they've said that they're not going to earn 2 salaries, because there used to be a problem with that. We used to have a minister who is also a member of parliament, but they would be like earning, you know, double salaries.
Well, of course, the allowances. Allowances is where
this is one of the concerns, and I raised earlier, where we have not decided whether it's pure presidential parliamentary, because in a parliamentary system, then this is a scenario, and in a pure presidential system, which is what we initially did with the 2010 constitution, then they are drawn from outside parliament. But for some reason, it hasn't even worked, even with that proposal of getting some people who are former members of parliament and bring them. It hasn't exactly worked as desired, and it's responding to something specific. There's a sense in which, and perhaps 2 issues, and the arguments driving this is around accountability, that you want these people, you know, we can talk to them whether, you know, even when they are in parliament. There's also a proposal, even people who are not elected, these who are the technocrats, they will be ex officio members of parliament, that they would actually be available to respond to questions on these issues. So there are 2 issues here, in terms of accountability, and I think for MPs is accessibility, that you actually want to talk to this person next to, I say, Osiani, there's this particular issue that has not been addressed. I know that is the thinking behind it, but these are some of the challenges where we are saying now that we are going for a hybrid, which is a very unique system, we have to find ways of how we'll make these work in that sense, and to ensure that the person now, if it is representing a specific constituency, but is also in charge of, you know, has a cabinet position, then serves the interest of the country, not necessarily just focusing on his constituency. So there's a sense in which there is a hangover from what we had in the past, just before the 2010 constitution. And for me, going back to what I said earlier, BBI was an opportunity for us to introspect, for us to have a conversation with ourselves and see, we have all these issues, what is not working? Even with the 2010 constitution that we have been implementing, and the arguments we haven't finished implementing, there are certain things that haven't worked the way we envisioned. So how do we fix that? And this is one of those proposals to increase accountability, to increase accessibility of these CSs, to make and there's a proposal to change it from CSs, call them cabinet ministers, because that is something perhaps Kenyans can relate with. Well, in a sense, it threatens the principle of the separation of powers and checks and balances that would have made it work. I still think this proposal being there will find a way of making it work, because I keep insisting, these are broad proposals. In terms of the specifics, what will actually work will be drawn from this, perhaps through a consensus team, so that we identify these political issues that require a lot of fixing there. What is the best pathway? And that is why Osiani said it's not clear whether we are going through a referendum, whether these are changes that we can just make in government. And there are certain non-political issues that can simply be fixed administratively outside this political process.
But knowing the way our government works, and if this is the situation, doesn't it even open more floodgates for graft, or even because the coalition of the members of parliament is well known now? You have friends who are also ministers in certain portfolios, and you going to do business with them.
I agree with Mole to the extent that in terms of separation of powers, it might be problematic. But I do not agree with him when he says that a member of parliament who is a minister will have his constituency suffering. Because in the UK, there are ministers who are MPs, and they function pretty well. Okay, so we either decide that you can be an effective leader who can multitask and still do it well, or not. There are other people who are not, there are MPs who are not ministers today, have not even spoken in parliament, not added value to legislation, not done a thing. They take salaries. When it's time for party, my friend, you will see them. When it's time for funerals, they will go and hurl insults, and yet they are not ministers. Yet they are not ministers. But their constituents also do not gain from them not being anything, or from them having no additional responsibilities. So the effectiveness of leaders is entirely upon them. And it is something that the president will have to be alive to as he proposes who becomes cabinet minister. Or there is a role introduced there called state ministers, which is borrowed, I think, from Tanzania and other contexts, Indonesia and the rest. State minister is going to be an assistant minister. They just want a big name for it so that everyone feels happy when they're given this role. In terms of not drawing 2 salaries, I would be happier if they told me about allowances. Because the allowances that parliamentarians get is equal to their salaries for starters.
There is,
so
but
if
there
is a proposal to
no more
remove
sitting
allowances.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
more sitting allowances.
Sitting allowances has been removed. Now this is where you know, my friend, listen. Mimi nimefanyia serikali kazi.
Yeah.
You can remove sitting allowances, but then you say if the state minister has extraneous allowance.
So just
of 300,000.
Warm clothes allowance.
Maybe you take this something.
Warm clothes allowance when you are traveling.
When you're traveling to places where there's winter.
You get it. So we may clap and it's good. And I think these are the things we will have to look at. But in the whole, does this achieve our desire for a better country? That's the question. And in my opinion, yes. Now, where you will see, because I have seen finally it seems Tanga and Kieleweke are on the same side. Until it is proposed, how do we achieve this?
That is where the division.
That is where you will know whether we are genuinely on the same side or page or not. If one side will propose a referendum and the other one goes, no, we can't have a referendum, then the question will be, hang on a minute. Why? I thought we have agreed we are moving forward.
Yeah.
Why don't we achieve it this way? Because I do not see how some of these things are able to be achieved without a referendum. I do not see. There is major alteration of the constitution document. Yeah. Major.
All right.
You can actually not even be able to touch the functions of parliament, which is basically prime minister, mixed cabinet. All of them are talking about functions of cabinet. There's no way you're going to do that without a referendum. But let me just say this. Actually, I get a feel when you go skim again through this document that there's a lot of concentration on satisfaction of the a desire to satisfy the political elite in this country. You see, look at the even we'll go to that, but we're also talking about the IBC being chosen by political leaders. Yeah. We're talking about a cabinet, a mixed cabinet. We are drawing again from politicians. So there's an overwhelming desire, or I think a problem which has been identified through this BBI to say that unless you satisfy the political elite, this country is not going to go anywhere. So there seems to be that slant in terms of a persuasion that we are going to solve our problems using. I'm not so sure that's the correct way to go.
Okay, Sam, I really have to take a break. Let's take a quick break, and there's a lot of feedback coming through. We'll read that after the break. Keep them coming. We'd like to know what your thoughts are in regards to the BBI. 22422 is the SMS line. Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. #Daybreak. See you in just a bit.